Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to take you through a detailed look at Ukraine's deadly strike on the Crimean Bridge, how it was carried out, what it actually hit, why it matters, and what the possible implications are going forward. Over the early morning hours on June 3, 2025, Ukraine announced that it had launched an underwater operation targeting the support pillars of the Crimea-Russia Bridge, also known as the Kerch or Crimean Bridge. The attack involved placing mines beneath the waterline on the submerged supports and then detonating explosives equivalent to about 100 kilograms of TNT. In the statement, Ukrainian officials claimed that underwater support structures were severely damaged at the bottom level. In response, Russian sources acknowledged that traffic had been suspended for about 3 hours early that morning, but later said the bridge resumed operations. Russia, however, contested the scale of the damage, saying that the bridge was functioning again and that claims of major destruction were exaggerated. To understand what makes this attack significant, it's important to consider what the Crimean Bridge is and why it matters so much to both sides. After Russia annexed Crimea in 2014, Moscow constructed this bridge to connect the occupied peninsula to mainland Russia. Stretching approximately 19 kilometers across the Kerch Strait, it carries both road and rail links. For Russia, it has been both a practical logistical corridor for supplying its troops in southern Ukraine and a powerful symbol of the annexation and of Putin's reunification narrative. For Ukraine, targeting the bridge is both a strategic move to cut supply lines and a symbolic act to challenge Russian control and sovereignty claims. This was not the first time the bridge has been hit. In October 2022, a massive blast caused sections of the road deck to collapse and ignited a fire on the rail bridge. Then, in July 2023, Ukraine used marine drones, often called sea drones, or unmanned surface vessels, to attack and damage parts of the road span. Each of these incidents was meant to degrade the bridge's structural integrity, disrupt traffic flow, and send a political message. The June 2025 strike marks the third confirmed attack under the full-scale war that began in 2022. What sets this latest strike apart is the method and the target. It was underwater, aiming at submerged structural supports rather than just the surface spans. Ukraine described a month-long covert effort in which explosive charges or mines were placed beneath the bridge. The implication is that Ukraine sought to inflict damage that would be harder to repair quickly, hitting parts less accessible to conventional countermeasures and threatening the integrity of the bridge foundations themselves. Ukrainian sources claimed that the detonation caused serious damage to supports at the seabed level, meaning the damage could be structural, not merely superficial. Russia's official portrayal is more cautious. Kremlin sources and state media downplayed the severity. They said that while operations were briefly suspended, the bridge resumed traffic and that structural damage claims were exaggerated or unsubstantiated. Still, some Russian sources admitted to unexplained closures or traffic interruptions between roughly 4 a.m. and 7 a.m. local time. Independent verification is limited, but satellite imagery and third-party analysis confirm that an explosion did occur near the underwater pillars, though the full extent of the damage remains unclear. So what are the effects and implications? First, the logistics. This bridge has been one of Russia's principal routes to supply conscript forces, move heavy equipment, fuel, and ammunition into Crimea and further into southern Ukraine. A disruption here forces Moscow to rely more heavily on alternative supply lines, sea, air, or long detours over less secure territory, all of which are slower, more expensive, riskier, and more vulnerable to further attacks. For Ukraine, that's exactly the goal: to raise the cost and difficulty of Russian resupply. On the symbolic side, striking a structure that has become emblematic of Russian territorial control over Crimea sends a message about the vulnerability of that rule. It challenges Moscow's narrative of permanence and projects Ukrainian resolve. This is warfare not just of tanks and bullets, but of infrastructure, narrative, and morale. Politically, Ukraine's ability to reach a heavily defended, symbolic structure like the Crimean Bridge demonstrates growing capabilities in intelligence, covert operations, and precision maritime warfare. It signals to Russia and to international observers that the status quo is under active challenge. Defense analysts suggest that the operation required coordinated underwater planning, stealth, and patience. For Russia, such vulnerability raises questions about how well its high-value infrastructure can actually be protected. On the international stage, attacks like this may complicate diplomatic discussions, influence perceptions about escalation risks, and shape future decisions on military aid and alignment. But there are also risks and limitations. Repairing a bridge is easier if damage is superficial. Damage to foundational supports underwater is harder, slower, and more resource-intensive. However, Russia has substantial engineering resources and may attempt patching, reinforcement, or alternate structural work. The fact that the bridge was reopened suggests that either damage was not catastrophic or that emergency repairs were made. Moreover, there is always the possibility of escalation. Russia may retaliate with strikes elsewhere, fortify the bridge further, invest more heavily in countermeasures against underwater threats, or shift supply priorities. Even if the bridge is disrupted, Russia might find alternate routes to Crimea, such as maritime paths or overland detours, though these are more vulnerable or constrained. From a legal and moral perspective, both sides frame this differently. Ukraine argues the bridge is a legitimate military target since it directly supports Russia's military operations. Russia calls such attacks terrorism or sabotage and may argue that civilian infrastructure is being threatened. This battle over framing is part of the ongoing information war. Each side uses narratives not only to justify its actions, but also to influence international perception and maintain domestic support. Looking ahead, this strike may accelerate certain dynamics. Russia will likely prioritize reinforcing bridge defenses, underwater sensors, patrols, anti-drone systems, acoustic detection networks, and hardened structural supports. Ukraine, on the other hand, may replicate or expand such underwater tactics, targeting other maritime choke points or infrastructure that supports Russian logistics. The psychological impact of this event may grow. If people begin to believe that even major symbols like the Crimean Bridge aren't safe, that could erode morale and confidence on both sides. In strategic terms, further disruption of the bridge would increasingly limit Russia's ability to project power from Crimea, weaken its supply chains to the southern front, and potentially isolate the peninsula further. For Ukraine, repeated success in these kinds of operations might open new opportunities in the Black Sea or along the southern coastal front. However, Ukraine must also manage the risks of escalation and Russian counterattacks. Destroying the bridge alone does not guarantee immediate breakthroughs. It must be part of a coordinated military strategy involving ground offensives, intelligence coordination, and sustained pressure on Russian logistics. In summary, Ukraine's underwater strike on the Crimean Bridge is a bold and technically demanding operation targeting one of Russia's most prized logistical and symbolic assets. While the full extent of the damage remains uncertain, It represents a shift toward attacking deeper, harder targets below the surface rather than striking only visible spans. The strategic intent is clear: complicate Russia's supply routes, challenge its claim over Crimea, and undermine confidence in its control. The impact will depend on how Russia responds, how quickly it can repair or reinforce the structure, and whether Ukraine continues similar operations in the future. Either way, the Crimean Bridge is no longer just a structure. It has become a contested symbol of control, resistance, and resilience. It stands as a reminder that in this war, infrastructure itself has become both a weapon and a battlefield. That wraps up this breakdown. If you liked this video, leave a comment, share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for more analyses.